Imagine being a young student in 2025, knowing that climate change threatens your near future, but only spending 10 hours in this year learning about climate change in school. How will that shape your hope for the future? The first reading this week is on the climate change country profile on Canada. Right off the bat, the first paragraph under climate change education and training in the country actually highlights there is a connection between education and a socially progressive, sustainable society, according to Learn Canada 2020. Now, why this is important? Only 1/3 of teachers reported teaching climate change or integrating its components into the classroom. Like I said in the beginning, only 1 to 10 hours of instructions per semester. The most important takeaway from this reading for me is that even with this limited amount of teaching, the teachers always focuses on the science of climate change instead of its impacts or actions. It just seems like there's very surface level understanding of climate change. And I'm actually taking another class right now called Curriculum Studies in Science Education for my master's. And the readings for this week in that class taught me there is a stark difference between science and the abstract nature of science. Those are two different things. Just like with this reading, it seems that climate change literacy is overly simplified for the sake of teaching younger students. There's more than one way of knowing the world, obviously, and teaching climate change as this sort of sub-branch of science actually limits the students' understandings to me. For me, teaching climate change involves advocating for change, and I firmly believe Canada needs equity so all students can receive equal climate change education, regardless of where they live. Teachers need professional development, time, and support to move beyond this surface level teaching. Climate education needs to be holistic, and there needs to be an implementation of pedagogical strategies to facilitate understanding of climate change. One example that I can think about is, using real world examples and extrapolating real numerical data to think of the implications of climate change. That to me is what is missing in the Ontario curriculum. My second slide is about the infographic created by Max Hughes, another reading for this week. The picture was too long, so I had to cut it to leave the most important part in there. To me, the statistic of 27% of kids not knowing how to explain climate change and 29% of teachers feeling like they are not ready to teach about climate change really stood out to me. The big takeaway for me from that infographic is that there is certainly a curriculum gap in climate change education, and this disparity further exacerbates the negligence of limited classroom coverage and provincial differences. But the good news is that there are more resources now, stretching from elementary to post-secondary education that involves youth, and government is actually funding opportunities such as Climate Change Fund and other initiatives to help support education. Finally, the last reading for me was about the carbon budgets. The MCC carbon clock uses the latest data from IPCC to project future emissions of CO2. I mean, when I opened the website for the first time and saw how fast the data was counting down on the clock, it gives me a sense of urgency for sure. It's obviously not a literal timeline of when a specific temperature will be reached, but rather it is a warning of how little time it actually remains for us to stay within the Paris Agreement goals. I think this is a great learning tool in science class for elementary students, for example, because it translates complicated terms like budget, time into concrete visual example of the clock counting down, which will help students, not only develop data literacy, but discuss higher level thinking topics, which I will not delve into today. But maybe you guys can think of some exercises when you have your own classroom that you can implement to develop student agency. Anyways, I'm excited to hear everyone's thoughts on this week's discussion board. Thank you for listening.